Hi, I'm Dan Cortopassi. Today I'm reviewing this N-scale Amtrak set from Kato. This train set includes everything you need to get started in the hobby of model railroading. Train sets are one of the ways that many people get started in the model railroading hobby. This Amtrak set from Kato includes everything you need to get started: a locomotive, 3 cars, track, and a power pack. The MSRP for this set is $280. I purchased my set in July 2022 for $194.99 from modeltrainstuff.com. Since there's a locomotive, 3 cars, track, and a power pack in this review, we'll start the set at 600 possible points. That's 100 points each for the locomotive and cars, 100 points for the track, and 100 points for the power pack. The set comes in a cardboard box with a carrying handle on top. Inside there's a foam cradle that holds the train, track, and power pack. The set includes an N-scale Amtrak P42 DC locomotive in the Phase 5 paint scheme. The locomotive comes in a plastic jewel case style box just like the ones that Kato sells separately. There's a plastic protector on the bottom of the engine that needs to be removed before it can be put on the track. Some additional detail parts are also included in the locomotive box. There are air hoses, number boards, and clear headlight covers for the locomotive. There are parts to make 2 long shank couplers to help the train around tighter curves. You won't need these if you use the track that comes with the set. There are also magnetic trip pins for the couplers if you want to use magnetic uncoupling. Each of the 3 cars also comes in its own jewel case. There's a sleeper car, a sightseer lounge, and a coach. All the cars are in the Amtrak Phase 4B paint scheme. This set includes enough of Kato's well-made unitrack to make an oval. There are 4 248mm or 9 3/4 inch straight sections, 1 124mm straight and matching 124mm re-railer section, 1 62mm straight and a matching 62mm straight power feeder track with cord, and 8 315mm or 12 3/4 inch radius curve sections. These curves are broad enough to accommodate most N-scale equipment. Kato offers a wide selection of unitrack available separately if you want to expand on the basic oval in this set later. Lastly, the set has a Kato DC power pack and plug-in power supply. The box also has a cardboard tray under the foam with instructions and a re-railer tool. This is a good box that should protect the set for storage and transport. Amtrak's P42 DC locomotives and Superliner cars are a staple on many of Amtrak's routes, including trains like the Empire Builder, California Zephyr, Capital Limited, Sunset Limited, Southwest Chief, and Coast Starlight. Superliners aren't used in some places in the eastern United States due to low tunnel clearances. Most Amtrak long-distance trains have more than 1 locomotive and 3 cars, but this set is a good starting point. Kato offers additional locomotives and Amtrak cars, making it easy to expand your fleet later. Most of the Amtrak trains that I've ridden have had 2 or 3 locomotives, several sleeper cars on one end, a dining car and sightseer lounge toward the middle, and then coaches on the other end. The number of coaches and sleepers can vary, probably depending on the popularity of the train. Amtrak trains often have 1 or more baggage cars behind the locomotives and sometimes a crew sleeper. Sometimes you'll see privately owned passenger cars tacked on the end of the train. I have seen some short Superliner trains like this section of the Empire Builder running along the Columbia River in Washington. This set would be perfect for a train like that. Amtrak's General Electric P42 DC locomotives were first produced in 1996, successors to the earlier P40 DC model that was introduced in 1993. Many of the P42 DC locomotives were delivered in Phase 3 paint. Amtrak has had several official paint schemes over the years, and they're commonly referred to as phases. So Phase 1 was Amtrak's first paint scheme, Phase 2 the second, etc. The Phase 5 paint scheme for locomotives, the one that's on the model, was introduced in 2000. The Phase 4B, also sometimes called Phase 6 for passenger cars, was introduced in 2002. Both are still in use as this program is being made in 2022, though Amtrak has recently introduced a new Phase 7 paint scheme on certain locomotives. I found photos of this particular locomotive, Amtrak 161, in Phase 5 paint in 2001. Over the years, Amtrak has made a subtle modification to the nose of these locomotives. Looking at photos, it appears that 161 received this modification in late 2010. The model represents the earlier as-built appearance, so the locomotive would be most appropriate for the 2001 to 2010 time period. I should note, however, that the nose changes would be very hard to see in N-scale, so this isn't something that would probably bother most people. More noticeable would be the new paint job 161 received in 2021, when it was repainted in Amtrak Phase 1 paint to help commemorate Amtrak's 50th anniversary. Externally, the coach and sleeper car look very similar. The sleeper has an extra window on the lower floor. Both cars also have different interiors. The sightseer lounge is a little easier to spot because of its larger windows. Overall, the cars are very nicely done and mostly accurate. I found photos of sleeping car 32054 in the same paint scheme as the model from 2006, so it's been in Phase 4B paint at least that long. The window configuration and details are correct. Photos show that coach 34039 was still in Phase 4 paint in 2006, which is similar to what's on the model but has Superliner spelled out in large letters over the striping near the center of the car. It was in Phase 4B paint without the Superliner writing by 2009. Half of one of the windows on the lower deck is blanked out. This could be simulated by painting out that window pane with silver or applying a silver decal over it. Otherwise, the model appears correct. Photos I found show that Sightseer Lounge 33003 got Phase 4 paint sometime between 1998 and 2004. It didn't get the new Amtrak Travel Mark logo until sometime after 2007. The car has a window on the lower floor on one side that shouldn't be there. I should note that some other Sightseer Lounge cars do have this window. Changing the car number would be a far easier fix than trying to remove the window, and the numbers are so small that I'm guessing most people would be willing to let this one go. Still, it's an inaccuracy, so I'm taking 5 points. The paint on the models is opaque and thin enough to allow the excellent detail to show through. The silver has a shiny metallic effect that looks really good, though this would best represent a train that just went through one of Amtrak's wash facilities. The trains tend to pick up some dust as they roll across the country. There's a very slight fuzziness to the separation line between the blue and silver on the locomotive, but I don't think it's bad enough to warrant a deduction. The striping on the cars is very crisp. The car numbers and other small writing is legible, though it takes a magnifying glass to see some of it. P42 locomotives are very streamlined on the outside, and most of the busy details are underneath. Kato has included just enough of this to look good in N-scale. The details seem robust enough that they won't be knocked off by handling the model. The locomotive has a separately applied horn casting on the roof. The fan grille is not photo-etched, but the detail still looks really good. The locomotive and cars have molded-on grab irons. These are nicely done, and I think they look fine at this small size. I really like the window glazing on the locomotive and cars, which fits flush and has very crisp black frame details. The locomotive cab and passenger cars have interiors, and the car interiors are different. There are actually roomettes in the sleeper, while the lounge car and coach have seats. The rear windows on the locomotive are the only ones that don't look onto something that looks real. You can see silver through them. This is a baffle that keeps the rear headlight LED from shining through the windows. It might have been better if Kato had molded this part in black. All of the locomotive's axles are powered and all the wheels are used for electrical pickup. The car vestibules are non-operating and don't touch when the cars are coupled together like the real ones do. None of the cars are lighted, but they are lighting ready. The cars have metal wheels with low-profile flanges. The trucks have electrical contacts, the copper strips near the wheels. Kato sells passenger car lighting kits that are available separately. The cars have truck-mounted Kato knuckle couplers on both ends. The coupler on one end of the sleeping car is low according to the microtrain's height gauge, so I'm taking 5 points. The coupler on the other end is also low. One coupler on the Sightseer Lounge is low. The other coupler is at the correct height. One coupler on the coach is low. The other coupler is also low. The locomotive has body-mounted Kato couplers. The front coupler is slightly low. The rear coupler is at the correct height. Mismatched coupler heights can sometimes lead to unwanted uncoupling, but despite that, these couplers seem to stay connected pretty well. I'm shaking these cars and they're not coming apart, which is good. If they can take this kind of shaking, then in normal operation they should stay together. To couple cars on the track, just push them together. To uncouple them, lift the end of one car to disengage the coupler. All the wheels on the locomotive and passenger cars are in gauge according to the National Model Railroad Association, or NMRA, standards gauge. The gauge of all the track sections is within acceptable NMRA tolerances. The locomotive and cars don't have any significant body wobble. Wobbly cars can shimmy unrealistically when they roll down the track. The locomotive weighs 4.4 ounces. Drawbar pull peaked at 0.7 ounces on my force gauge. That doesn't sound like much, but it's more than enough power for 3 passenger cars. The sleeping car and coach weigh 1.5 ounces each, and the Sightseer Lounge weighs 1.4 ounces. The NMRA recommended weight for cars of this length is just over 1.4 ounces, so these cars are right on the money. It's important to have properly weighted cars because they stay on the track better than cars that are too light. The locomotive has directional LED headlights. The front headlights, ditch lights, and number board turn on when the engine is going forward. The rear headlight turns on when the engine is in reverse. The red marker lights are not functional on either end. Amtrak uses these kind of like taillights when the locomotive is running in reverse or pushing on the rear of a train. Kato Unitrack is very easy to use. To connect the pieces, just make sure the rail joiners are aligned and push them together until you hear a click. To use the feeder track, first connect the supplied cord to the bottom. It only fits one way and should also click when it's fully seated. This piece of track has notches on both sides so that the wires can come out. The re-railer section has side pieces that can be attached to it to make it look like a road crossing. The rectangular piece could be used in place of one of the sides if you had double track with two of the re-railer sections next to each other. This piece of track isn't just for show. Plastic guideways can help put a derailed wheel back on the track automatically. To disconnect pieces of Unitrack, bend them sideways at a slight angle. The re-railer tool can be used to put cars and locomotives on the track. Just put the tool on the track, and then put a car on it and roll it onto the rails. There's also a rail joiner removal tool that can be used if you need to remove or replace one of the Kato unijoiners. If you're just starting out, you probably won't need this. I've had both HO and N-scale Unitrack for many years, and so far I haven't had to replace any joiners. The power pack is pretty simple. On top it has a throttle knob and a 3-position direction switch. There's also an indicator LED and a small reset button. I'm not sure what the point is, but the screw heads on top of the unit are fake. Don't try to unscrew them. There are connectors on the side for Kato switch controllers which are not included in this set. You can use these if you get more track components later and want to use the Kato switch controllers. The power pack has 2 connectors on the back. One is an input connector for the plug-in power supply. The other is a connector for the track. The wire that goes to the feeder track has a matching connector on one end. The indicator LED normally shows green when the power supply is connected to an outlet. If there's a short, the light will change to red and the power pack will shut down. Press the reset button after the short is cleared to reset the power pack. Note that there's no on-off switch. To turn the power off, you need to unplug the power supply. With the locomotive on the track and the direction lever in the forward position, I can advance the throttle and the locomotive will move. If the direction lever is in the middle off position, then nothing happens when you move the throttle. If I put the lever in reverse, the locomotive goes the other way. Note that because this is a DC power pack, if I physically turn the locomotive around, it will still go in the same direction. So the lever is set to reverse, but the locomotive is going forward. With DC, you should think of forward and reverse as directions on the track, not necessarily how the locomotive is facing. If you use all of the straight sections, the track that's included with the set makes an oval approximately 53 inches long and 26 inches wide. That was a little too wide for my workbench countertop, so I set it up on our dining table. Alternatively, you could make the oval smaller by only using the shortest straight sections, which would be about 28 inches by 26 inches. You need to use the short straight with the wires to get power to the track, so this is the smallest oval you can assemble with the track in the set. The locomotive runs very smoothly. It'll go pretty fast, though I'd recommend against that if you have the track up on a table like I do. My dad wrecked my first train when I was a kid by running it so fast that it flew off the track and took a dive to our stone floors. One way to tell a good quality locomotive is by how well it performs at low speeds. Kato locomotives are excellent in this regard, and this one is a good example. It runs steadily at slow speeds and it's very quiet. The Kato throttle has enough power for additional locomotives if you want to expand your fleet. Dirty track can sometimes be an issue. If the locomotive starts to stall, it may be time for a cleaning. One easy method is to use isopropyl alcohol or electrical contact cleaner on a paper towel. Rubbing alcohol from the local grocery store or pharmacy will also work. Just dampen the towel and then wipe the rails. I wouldn't recommend applying cleaner directly to the track or trains. Also, I would not recommend trying to lubricate the locomotive. It really doesn't need it. The lubrication it has from the factory should be good for years. If you're not sure how and where to lubricate a model train, and if you don't have the proper lubricants, you're better off leaving it alone. If you do need to lubricate a model train, always make sure to use plastic-compatible oils and grease intended for model trains and use them very sparingly. Running a train like this around in circles could be made more fun by adding station stops. Have the train slow down, stop at a station, pause to allow time for people to get on and off, then start moving again. You could stop at the same station multiple times, pretending that the train is in a different town each time. If you want to make it even more of a challenge, add a schedule. If you don't have an N-scale station, you could use something else as a substitute. Even a small cardboard box would work. Be creative. After reviewing and playing with the set, I was able to get everything back into the box. To remove the locomotive shell, gently spread the sides apart. The chassis should begin to drop out. The engine is DCC ready. The light board on top of the mechanism can be replaced with a DCC decoder if you want to convert your model to DCC operation. Doing that is beyond the scope of this review, but I have other videos on this channel that talk about DCC. The instructions include a diagram that show how to place the detail parts on the locomotive. There are 2 number boards, but you only need one of these. The other's a spare. I'd recommend cutting the parts from the sprues rather than trying to break them off. A small file can be used to clean up any excess plastic. The number board just presses into place in the rectangular opening above the Amtrak logo on the nose. The process is the same with the headlight glazing. As with the number board, there are 2 pieces, but you only need one. These small parts are easily lost, so I'm glad Kato included extras. There are 2 different types of air hoses. The straight ones go in front, and the bent ones go in the rear. There are no extras of these, so be careful not to lose them. There are pins on the backs of the hoses that fit into holes in the pilots on the locomotive. Tweezers or needle nose pliers are a big help here. Once the hoses are in the holes, press them firmly to secure them. The rear hoses should be placed so that they bend toward the center of the locomotive. In front, you'll need to remove the snowplow before you can install the hoses. Just pull it off. You shouldn't need any adhesive on the hoses, but if you want a little added insurance, I'd recommend a tiny dab of canopy glue. This is a water-soluble glue for hobbyists that dries clear and stays slightly flexible. Super glues won't work well on the hoses because they're made of a very slippery plastic. Once the front hoses are in place, I'll reinstall the plow. If you want to use uncoupling magnets and need to install the coupler trip pins, they fit into the hole that goes through each coupler. Use a pair of needle nose pliers to grip the pin. There's a long side and a short side. The long side should be up. Push the long end of the trip pin into the hole in the coupler. The bottom of the trip pin should end up just above the railhead. If it hangs too low, it can snag on the track. If it's too high, then it won't work. Microtrains sells a trip pin height gauge, but it's just a piece of metal 10/1000ths thick, so you could substitute something else of the same thickness. When resting on the track, there should be just enough clearance for the trip pin gauge to pass under the trip pin. The trip pin should also be angled slightly toward the knuckle side of the coupler when viewed from above. The trip pins are metal and will force the knuckles apart when parked over a magnet, uncoupling the cars. To take the shells off the cars, gently spread the bottom while pulling on the trucks. I found it easiest to do one end at a time. The body shell will then lift off. This gives us a better view of the interior seats and the electrical contacts. If you wanted to dress up these cars, painting the interiors in realistic colors and adding N-scale seated figures would look really good. Let's see what we've got. The Sightseer lounge car has a window that shouldn't be there, so I took 5 points in the prototype accuracy category. Some of the equipment had coupler height issues, so I took a total of 30 points in the standards and operation category. That leaves us with 565 out of 600 possible points, which averages to about 94 points, a solid A on our report card. Individually, the locomotive scored 95, each car scored 90, and I couldn't find any fault with the track or power pack. This set definitely gets a green signal. Kato train sets aren't necessarily cheap, but they're of a really high quality and will last for years. I have quite a few Kato locomotives. Some of them are decades old and they still run great. If you're looking for a train set for yourself or as a gift, you might want to consider this one. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Stay tuned and thanks for watching.